This is a Fleet Success Show, dedicated to helping you and your fleet succeed using the experience of fleet professionals and Hall of Fame fleet legends. The show that explores how the pillars of stakeholder satisfaction, intentional culture, resource efficiency, and risk management all combine to lead your fleet to success. We're glad you're here. Now, let's get into the show. Hey, welcome back for another episode of the Fleet Success Show with your hosts, Josh Turley, Nathan Schafer. Good to see you again, Nathan.
Yeah, it's been so long.
I know, right? I know, just to give everybody a little background about who I am, I'm Josh Turley, CEO over here at RTA Fleet. I've been helping and supporting fleets with their fleet management information systems for about 20 years now. And I am particularly fond of helping fleets become fleet leaders, fleet managers become better fleet leaders, and leading their people and setting up an intentional culture. And Nathan, I know you've got some background in public fleet management. Why don't you tell our listeners a little about yourself?
Yeah, I've been doing fleet management for about 25 years, and a good portion of that is in government. I do have some private construction industry, and that will come into play a little bit, with some stories later. But just a good 25 years in the industry. Last 3 at RTA, helping fleets use software and do things a little better.
And you're kind of a jack of all trades here at RTA. We tap you for a lot of things, everything from implementation to training to customer success to sales engineer to whatever.
I have my hands in a few things.
You do. Product design. I think we pulled you in for product design at some point as well, because we definitely love hearing from fleet managers on designing the product. So today we wanted to talk about vehicle inventory. It's something that we do and we offer as part of our consulting projects. We'll go out and help you do vehicle inventory and things like that. So Nathan and I wanted to talk through some of that process, what it looks like, why you should do a vehicle inventory, what happens if you don't. So Nathan, for our listeners who have never heard of this concept before, or maybe they just, don't understand it, what is a vehicle inventory?
I mean, in its very basic sense, it's literally having eyes on every asset you say you own, right? So all your vehicles, all your equipment, all your trailers, if it's in the software as an active asset, you should put hands on it or eyes on it, make sure you still own it.
And I would even go beyond if it's even in the software. Okay, so this is a story. I was at a NAFA event here locally, and this poor gal, I think she had just got thrown into her role, and she literally had a stack of papers of like titles that the fleet had purchased at some point. There's no digital records. There's no telematics. And she's like, we don't have a yard. I don't know where these are. In a city like Phoenix. Good luck. And so, yeah, it's, sometimes those assets don't make it into the fleet management system. And we're going to talk about that too. All right. So getting eyes on everything that the city, county, corporation, whatever, everything that fleet should own or that the company or organization owns, getting eyes on that asset. And obviously in the world of fleet, we're definitely talking about things with wheels, but it could include other assets too, right? Like generators, HVAC equipment, I'm sure.
Yeah, construction equipment.
Yeah. So there's a lot that can go into that you might be responsible for as a fleet manager, but definitely if it's got a motor and wheels, you should be counting that. All right. So now the question is, well, why? Why do I need to worry about doing a vehicle inventory?
Obviously we're reporting things that we own. We talked about tax implications a little bit ago, but if it's an asset on a balance sheet, especially in private, corporations, there's some accounting principles that say we need to go out and count assets for those tax implications and liabilities. So we definitely want to make sure that what we say we own, we do own, because if we're getting tax write-offs, we want to make sure we still have it. But also to make sure that it hasn't been stolen or it's missing. When I worked for a construction fleet, we were moving equipment all over the Salt Lake County, weekly. I mean, stuff was moving all over the place, and so it was kind of before GPS was affordable to everybody. This was probably 15 years ago, maybe a little longer. And all of a sudden we tracked with a magnet board, equipment numbers and descriptions on magnets and move things around on boards. It's archaic, but it worked for us. And this piece of equipment was still sitting out at one of these jobs that was supposed to be done. And so one day I drive out there and I just start talking to the people at the company. I'm like, hey, have you seen this, piece of equipment? And I walked the entire shop. I walked their yard, not there. I have no idea where that piece of equipment went to this day. But literally, that's exactly why we want to make sure, we're keeping track of stuff because it will walk away.
Or literally roll away, right? In this case, it depends on the type of equipment. I know, one of our consultants right now is actually in a city doing a full on inventory, and it's amazing. I'm guessing there's times where, that there should be an asset here and it's just not there. Or sometimes you find an asset that you had no record of. Have you ever had that happen?
Yeah, and I will say, working in city government, the biggest issue we get is, I won't say rogue departments, but you get these departments that, have this handshake deal with the city manager and finance, and they get money to go buy stuff on their own, and they don't include fleet, and then they're buying assets, and you don't know about it until it shows up at the shop to get an oil change, or it has a flat tire, and you're like, well, where did this come from? And they're like, oh, well, we bought it. Well, thanks for letting us know so we could keep track of it for you, So that goes on, I would say, way more than anybody probably knows.
Well, and the danger there is obviously just the amount of liability, right? So especially if you're in public fleet, but no, this is actually true for corporate too. The amount of liability, if your fleet manager is not managing that asset and it's not getting PM'd on time or properly, the amount of, it's almost, I don't know that it would be criminal. It could be. I'd probably have to talk to a lawyer about that, but it definitely civilly liable for negligence, for failure to, follow commercially reasonable standards with the maintenance of that asset, keeping good records of the maintenance of that asset. I mean, that's the fleet manager's number one job. And, is making sure that everything's accounted for. And so, let's say that rogue asset gets into an accident. Now who's on the hook for that? It's going to be the organization, whether that's a city or, a private company. So, you let that happen. This is another reason why you should be doing an active inventory. You're just walking around looking.
Yeah, and I would say it's good practice. If you're on a standard replacement cycle, whether if you're in a city and you're doing those yearly, or if you're a corporation, you do it once a year at budget time. You want to make sure that the things that you're replacing are coming in so that they can be disposed of, and you're issuing out the new assets. That's always a good time. We're replacing this stuff, but once we're done with that replacement cycle, it's always a good time to just say, well, let's walk the different parking lots. Let's, go to the different departments. Let's put hands on things. Maybe we're going to update photos. You can even coordinate a roll by with your departments and just say, hey, everybody that has a city vehicle or a vehicle that belongs to this department, from this time to this time, just drive through the yard. We just want to take a picture of it so we can, account for it. And it's not going to take you any time out of your day, and let them get back to work. And, it's amazing the things that you find when you do that stuff. It's unbelievable.
Because no one goes to school for fleet management, chances are you were never formally trained on how to successfully lead a fleet. That's where the Fleet Success Playbook comes in. The Fleet Success Playbook is your guide to building a safe, reliable, and efficient fleet that provides exceptional service. Learn all about the 4 pillars of fleet success: stakeholder satisfaction, intentional culture, resource efficiency, and risk management. Get nearly 100 years of combined advice on common challenges, practical solutions, actionable tips, and real examples from fleet industry experts who have been there and done that. Visit www.fleetsuccessplaybook.com to request your free copy today.
One of the other reasons to do this as well is proof of ownership, proving that you actually had this vehicle at this time, what the condition of that vehicle was, because you never know what might happen, right? Maybe one of your electric vehicles gets in an accident and it catches all the others on fire. You've had personal experience with, shop fires, and all of a sudden you lose a whole bunch of assets that go in there. You got to be able to prove that you had it, and having photographic evidence like, nope, it was in the yard on this date and this is what it looked like with the number on the side. We can prove we had this asset.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the fire. So the fire happens, and they determined it was one of the vehicles, one of the plow trucks started the fire, and it burned down half the public works building and 12 trucks and a loader and all kinds of stuff, right? And if you don't think the insurance investigators came in and started being very stringent about records, you're wrong, right? Because it was, they wanted to know when the last time it was in the shop, when the last time was that we touched it, what were we working on, and so they were very stringent about records. So if you got rogue departments buying stuff and they're not reporting it to you, that's just one small piece that that liability could come back.
So, other, I guess mechanical pieces of this, we talked about maybe doing a roll by. Like, are you just printing off a sheet of paper and you're basically just checking them off a list? How would you go about doing that? Knowing some of the tools and technology we have available today, how would you go out doing a vehicle inventory?
Well, I think telematics helps, find locations. So it's kind of nice to be able to use telematics to assist with where things are if we can't find it, or if we're trying to just drive around, and do that. Using technology, obviously we've got a list electronically. If you've got a mobile app with your FMIS, that you can take photos with, you can walk out, take a photo of it, attach that photo to the record. Also update odometers, do things like that so that we touched it, we updated the hour meter, the odometer, whatever it might be, get a good current photo of it, and attach that to the record. And so I think that's a good way to do it. Maybe make some notes or, something like that in the record just to update and say we touched it on this date and things like that. So definitely beneficial. I would definitely get, photos if you can and attach all that stuff to the record so that you can prove that you were there. Maybe
another tip would be if you've recently seen a vehicle, right? Because every year you should be doing some type of annual inspection. That's a great time just to do like an inventory spread out throughout the year. But even like with your parts, we recommend doing a quarterly parts inventory. Your vehicle should be in a similar thing, maybe not quarterly, but annually, where it's just to count it. We're just counting it. We're just getting a picture of it. We're not doing anything else. It might be more efficient that way, but it at least makes sure that you've seen it on this date, and you're not trying to go run reports like, well, did we actually see it that day, or did we just have a work order, with that picture evidence? So doing an actual dedicated inventory session, just makes that really clean, and then all the records are together as well.
Yep. I will say some of the tough stuff too is, attachments. That was one thing that we had a hard time trying to inventory because, typically they get bought with a serialized machine. And attachments are typically serialized, but they don't necessarily get recorded with that machine. So you're walking a lot, and it could be like at the parks department or something like that that's, got mowers and backhoes and all kinds of stuff, and there's buckets and snow blowers and all kinds of attachments, right? And that was, for us, I don't know that a physical inventory had ever been done before we did one, and it was a mess, walking through trying to figure out where all that stuff came from and where it goes and what it attaches to. It was an exhausting experience.
Well, and has it ever been moved? What's the life of that? Like, when did we even buy this? We don't know. It might have been 20 years ago. We don't know. And then you're trying to go figure out like date of manufacture and all that, and just trying to run off, the date and the tags that are on that asset itself. Hopefully there's still some on it, right? As you go through, so we talk about like how to do it. We've talked about some of the things like what happens if you don't do it. What are some other things that pop up? If you decide not to do inventory, or it's been, like you said, this is the first time this has ever happened. What are some of the other things that pop up?
I had a couple interesting things. I talked about replacement and kind of making sure that the replacement stuff's going smoothly, right? One of the things that I always used to get was, hey, that thing's for replacement. The new one's here. I need you to bring it in, and they'd be like, oh, we're just going to use it for another week. We're almost done doing whatever it is we're doing. And you're like, okay, well, then everybody forgets, right? You get busy and you forget, and replacement cycle's done. And then the next year you go to replace things. And then all of a sudden you put your replacement list together, and that asset that got replaced last year all of a sudden pops up again, but you don't realize it, initially until you go to replace it again. You're like, wait a second, that's not right. So, especially in organizations that are dealing with thousands of assets, you got to have a good process for that replacement, because if you don't, then all of a sudden assets that you thought were gone are now still here. So you get the fleet creep and some of those things that, unintentionally you don't mean to do. And so that's why, counting stuff is great. Hopefully you don't take it off of your list or out of your system until you actually get a bill of sale that you sold it, or an invoice. But, it could get you in trouble. And we had a department that was pretty notorious for trying to, oh, we're going to keep it for another week, because they'd forget about it. We'd forget about it, and then they'd try to replace it again the next year. And, if you're in government, that's that kind of funding stuff, funding a replacement for something twice can get you in trouble. So you got to pay attention to that stuff. They got it over on me once, but once I saw what they were doing, I kind of got a good process in place. But, little things like that you don't think are happening, that will add to your fleet real quick.
Well, and especially if you're doing any kind of like chargeback system, or you're charging a replacement fee, which is something we recommend always doing, right? Is part of your vehicle chargeback that you include charging for the replacement of that vehicle, so that when it's time to replace a vehicle, you actually have money and CapEx set aside for it. So you don't have to go fight for budget. It's been saved up over time. But yeah, you do that and then it's up for replacement next year. Well, it's only had a year under the old new replacement cycle. It's the rogue fleet, but you at least knew about it at one point, but it's rogue fleet by any other name. It's the same as if they got that sweetheart deal from the city manager to go buy their own thing. Because otherwise it'd be coming in, and I guess maybe if you didn't flag it that it had been replaced, you wouldn't have known that you replaced it with another asset, unless you'd moved it to a different facility or different location or tagged it somehow in the system. But yeah, it definitely will get you into trouble, right? If you start hoarding assets or you're trying to double dip on the replacement budget, accounting doesn't like that. They're not fans of that. They will absolutely come down on you. So
yeah, one of the other great benefits of doing that physical inventory too, like you said, is we have the list of things that we say are active. Well, what about the things that we don't find? Do we go find a sale record? Hopefully you find a sale record, so hopefully you sold it, right, and just didn't take it out of the system. I first couple years doing some of this stuff, I found a lot of stuff that was sold that just never got, marked as sold or moved out of the, active vehicle list in the software. So, it's tough. If you're doing those yearly inventory, or not inventories, but the yearly PMs, once a year, that's a good way to catch some of that stuff too. But yeah, initially, when I first took over the city, it was finding all kinds of stuff that had been sold and just not taken out of the system. There just wasn't a good process in place. So, that this stuff will help you catch those things too.
Yeah, and there's definitely different consequences, right? So like for a city that overstates its assets and things like that, you have issues with fraud and abuse. But on the corporate side, on the private side, if you're not keeping up with your assets, well, you're actually materially affecting the balance sheet, especially with some of these assets. If you're a garbage company, that's a $400,000 truck. So what ends up happening is like you can actually get yourself into tax liability issues. Like forget the corporate liability or the professional liability of not maintaining a vehicle. Now you actually may trigger some tax issues because you're not properly handling the disposition of those assets. They've been on your records and been on your books for years, but you got rid of them, should have written them off, probably sold it, and then you didn't recognize the gain from the sale. Otherwise, because that's got to hit somewhere. There are all kinds of tax implications if you're not properly managing your inventory. And you'll find yourself under all kinds of penalties from the IRS. They love that. So
yes, they do.
Anything else, Nathan, I'm not thinking about when it comes to vehicle inventory, some of the challenges with doing vehicle inventory? I know one of our fun friends is having some challenges just politically. There's sometimes people can get a little bit persnippety when all of a sudden you're looking into their stuff. I'm sure that this department never did anything wrong in your case where they were having their rogue fleet, but it definitely can feel like that as somebody's looking at your thing and auditing you. You're dealing with people, and people have emotions, and sometimes you have to deal with the fear and the psychology that comes along with that.
Yeah, there's definitely some ego that comes into play, unfortunately, with different personality types and stuff, and especially if they think you're trying to take things away from them or something like that, and it's like, we're just here to make sure you have what we think you have, especially if they're making those handshake deals and have things that you don't know about, right? That's especially when they get a little
very defensive. Well, because they have something to defend, because they did something wrong, and
right.
they know it, right? They got caught with their hand in a cookie jar.
Yeah, and I worked pretty well with our department heads and just said, I want to make sure that we're taking care of the assets, however you get it, right? Let me take on the liability and the responsibility for maintaining it and make sure it's safe for you guys, and keeping the records and stuff like that. And that's ultimately what it came down to for us. I think some fleet managers unfortunately don't have it that easy. I think they have a lot more of a battle, and it can get political, and you just got to do what you can.
And that we're going to add part-time psychologists to the list of fleet manager duties.
There you go.
I don't know if you've ever seen that slide. Mark's got a slide where he talks about all the different things that fleet managers are responsible for.
Yeah.
And it's like a very, very condensed, and he has, slide 1, and it's probably got 50 bullets on it. And he says, oh, but wait, there's more. And he goes to slide 2. It's got another 50 bullets. Slide 3, we're still filling out, but we're going to go ahead and put part-time psychologist on the list now.
Definitely need to, for sure.
All right. Well, if you haven't done a vehicle inventory, it's obviously something we'd love to help you with. We can guide you through it, walk you through it. We can step onto the political landmines for you and be the bad guy. Lord knows we're doing that right now in a couple of cases. Just email us, podcast@rtfleet.com. Go check out fleetconsulting.com. And we are absolutely happy to help you with those types of projects. If you don't have an FMIS to help you with that as well, well, we're really good at that piece. So happy to help you there. But otherwise, until next time, we'll see you guys on the show. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others. Post about it on LinkedIn or leave a review. Want to learn more about our fleet management software, Fleet 360? Check us out at rtafleet.com. If you want to learn more about having your fleet evaluated by our consulting team, go to fleetconsulting.com.